Hello and welcome to Satish Jha show. Corruption has come to the fore once again in conversations. Chief Justice of India himself has opined on corruption, and he has tried to put his best foot forward, his wisdom as he sees it. Kejriwal has gone to Gujarat and he says, I may not know politics, but I know how to end corruption. I began my journey with Jayaprakash Narayan's Bhrishtachar Mitao campaign. As a child, when I heard the word corruption, I had a certain image of that, and that image was bribery. That government employees, who actually are your employees, my employees, everybody's employees, they, instead of being employees of the people who pay for them, they become a power unto themselves. Same thing happens to political leaders. They come to you, they ask you to elect them, their people come, they beat their drums, they try to bribe the voters, they give them a blanket here, a bottle of liquor there, or whatever they think. They make announcements, they make promises. Ultimately, they try to win their confidence, or at least vote. And then when they come to power, they forget that these are the voters who paid for them. And then the chief minister, a journalist who points out there is wrong, he imprisons him. A government, the one you voted for, when you go to ask for something, they beat you up. In other words, every kind of humiliation is heaped on the same people in whose name the government works. And ask yourself, when you think of corruption, what comes to your mind the most? And I used to think of basically, it's just the first policeman you see, a traffic policeman, or whosoever see, a clerk that processes the application. But corruption is not just there, or the man on the highway stopping a truck, taking money from there. No matter where you go, to the extent you have to pay for a public service, which is already paid for, that is one kind of corruption. But corruption goes all the way up. Corruption is, if you look at the etymology of corruption, anything which debases meaning of what you're supposed to do is corruption. Your behavior in your own moral context, if it is not the moral you signed up for, it becomes corrupt. But that's a bigger conversation. Corruption is seen in the context of governance, mostly, where employees of people, civil servants, they're servants first, and they have to be civil, but they're neither civil nor servants. Think of the Indian Administrative Service and all its other features. Every single IAS I know. And once I was told by a senior officer of the state to talk to a junior IAS officer of the state. He was so nice and polite to me one day. And when I showed him the problem with him, he behaved, this tiny little fellow, a tiny little IAS officer, the way he behaved was as if he was the Lord. And he was talking to someone who had been appointed by a prime minister in the rank of what they used to call 8,000 rupees basic, which is secretary's rank. So in other words, nothing matters. I went to the chief secretary, to another chief secretary, that guy totally ignored him because there was no context of that. In other words, there was no gain in it. So gain or corruption, it defies rank. It defies everything. It only looks at who in front of you actually can gain from it, therefore they do something. Now gain can be many kinds. It can be social, can be political, can be financial, can be any kind. Can be just a good relationship, whatever it may be. But any gain, if it influences your judgment about what's right and wrong, is corrupt. But that's a very fine definition. What Chief Justice of India is probably talking about is what he sees all the time, since he has to hear cases, how corruption means. For some considerations, which are totally extraneous, facts present to the court are also altered. In particular, he talks about CBI this time. And he talks about all the investigating agencies, they should be put together under one umbrella. So there are not multiple agencies and there's no conflict. And one agency's fact doesn't become other agencies' distraction. That's when you see things in a perspective of bits and pieces, sounds like a reasonable approach to have. But when it comes to looking at what actually causes corruption, I'm reminded of Mrs. Gandhi when she was Prime Minister. She talked about corruption as a global phenomenon. That was her refuse to basically say corruption cannot be just removed. It's social, it's people are corrupt. People become corrupt. I go back to one little clerk at a railway station who apparently felt he was very honest. But he used to take 50 paisa for every fish or whatever. I'm looking at 40, 50 years back. From the guy who was selling it, who was already paid for the ticket, just to put his stuff on the train, he used to take 50 paisa per packet or whatever it was at that point in time. Now 50 paisa in the context of his 200 rupees salary or 150 or whatever the salary was, for per packet becomes a lot of money. And that keeps changing all the time. Is that clerk corrupt? It is a corruption. And similarly, you go all the way up, you hear about all kinds of crores and crores of rupees, what transacts between lawyers and the whole judicial system. You keep hearing about them. We don't do. So Ranjan Gogoi, a former Chief Justice, he said, judges don't drop from heaven. We all come from society. It says society is corrupt, people are corrupt. And corrupted has become an accepted way of living. In other words, is Washington saying, he got caught. In other words, everybody is corrupt. But the one who gets caught is seen as corrupt. Now, that is a conversational way to look at corruption. But let's look at it seriously as well. So when Chief Justice of India thought of how to solve the problem of corruption, what does he come up with? Well, the person who will be appointed to head this new organization, which should be created by the statute, should be selected the same way as the CBI director. After saying the CBI has been totally compromised, more or less, that the confidence people had in CBI has disappeared, and that institutions, unless they are trusted, they are not really serving the purpose they were designed for. After saying that, he says how to appoint the head of that institution the same way, just like CBI. How will that person do any differently than the head of CBI? Effectively, he's through another route, echoing what Gogoi, the former CJI, said, that corruption is in our veins. Corruption is something which we just can't get out of because we don't fall from heaven. So Americans have another way of saying it. Keep me honest. So do everything to keep me honest. You create a system and then you create a system to check that as well. Our checks and balances have totally disappeared because our leaders don't want that. Now you remember that this current government came on the back of something called Lokpal. Now Lokpal was a drum beaten by the same Kejriwal who talks about ending corruption. He knows how to end corruption. But this man, he hasn't talked about Lokpal ever since he became Chief Minister of Delhi. Who wants Lokpal? Because Lokpal will be just as corrupt as everybody else. He's a human being. If he's a human being and he's corrupt basically, or corruptible basically, then what difference does it make whether you put a Ram or Shyam or Rahim or Ahmad or John or whosoever? Doesn't make a difference. So the first thing is you need a leader who can help cleanse the system, but all the cleansing doesn't do much. What does it is this. Think of Japan. We've heard the stories of Japan. When the earthquake comes, when the cyclone comes, when people have to be given, they don't cross the line. They all follow the line. You leave something, Japan has apparently lowest crime rate. The reason also is that if the prosecution begins, in 1,000, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 will not be indicted, not be convicted. So when conviction rate of state agencies is almost 100%, then there is no room for it. Once you're convicted, once you are accused, you're convicted, as good as convicted. So that challenge in that society, so no one has any incentive to basically be on the wrong side of the law. But what if the legal system starts misusing its powers? So then you have to have an internal review system. In the US, that review system is reasonably powerful, but not as effective as it should be or can be. Because ultimately, people are partisan. They're Democrat and Republicans. So one thing Republican says sounds like it's day and night between the two. So if a Republican thinks it's good, Democrat is going to think it must be rotten, and vice versa. So then even if you create an agency because of the human frailty, what is the solution to this? So the challenge is, in a basically corrupt society where people's morals are compromised from as soon as they're born. In Bihar, the basic word for anybody who was getting married was, what is your external income? Somebody with no external income was considered totally ineligible as a groom. If that is your culture, then how do you end corruption? Jayaprakash Narayan tried. Indira Gandhi didn't have to try. She justified it as global phenomena. Current regime doesn't even think of corruption in the sense, because when it comes to corruption index, I can't find any government which has come this far. You just heard the report that the banks have written off 12,770 crores of a project given to Adani. The nation is gifting 12,770 crores to Adani because Adani has taken care of someone who is in power. Is that corruption? Is there a way to handle that? So in other words, we have no way of handling any reasonable corruption. So who are the corrupt who finally you see? Those are the corrupts who are not liked by somebody. If somebody doesn't like you, doesn't matter, you have to be corrupt. They will make you look corrupt. So system basically functions as if those with power, they can paint the saint as corrupt. And they can paint the most corrupt as a saint. So that is the challenge the current system has thrown at us as common citizens. So a citizen who doesn't say anything, who is willing to wear everything, is fine. But a citizen who stands up, he runs the risk of being at the wrong end of the whole process. And therefore nobody stands up. But the basic function of a good governance process is to ensure that not only we mouth no corruption, we create systems that reduce corruption, that minimize the possibility of it, that try to go in the direction of eradicating without causing those who are not corrupt being made victims of the system because somebody doesn't like them. So how do you create that system? Clearly, your Chief Justice said it doesn't work. He gave some very beautiful lines, and it would be nice to read them actually, come to think of it. Because ultimately, when it comes to talking, these are first-rate minds. They clearly have something to say. But that's just a conversation. It doesn't just change anything as such. Has never changed anything so far. So if I look at the beautiful lines from the Chief Justice of India, for a pluralistic society like ours, our rich diversity cannot be sustained through dictatorial governance. Great thing. But then isn't it what's happening right now? CBI was a symbol of impartiality and independence. Whenever the citizen doubted the skill and impartiality of its own state police, they sought investigation by CBI as they wanted justice to be done. But with the passage of time, like every other institution, every other institution, CBI has also come under deep public scrutiny. Its actions and inactions have raised questions regarding its credibility in some cases. There is an immediate requirement and requirement has become immediate. It's always immediate. It was always immediate. Immediate 75 years ago, it was immediate last year, immediate 10 years ago. But how do you do that? So unless you create a filtering system, somebody works, somebody monitors, flags, somebody investigates, and these agencies are independent of political process. What was the challenge in Trump's time? That Trump spoke to the FBI director directly without someone being present. That should not be allowed. What is the challenge when Bill Clinton spoke to the previous Attorney General of America when Hillary Clinton was running for presidency? That became the biggest issue for several months. In other words, President of India or Prime Minister of India should not meet the Chief Justice of India under any circumstances without due, process being there. In other words, somebody has to be there to record. In the White House, every single call is recorded. Every conversation gets recorded, and that remains part of, the archives available as needed to whosoever. There's a process for that. Some after 20 years, some after 50 years, they get classified in the process. But there is a process. In other words, it may not redeem you today, but eventually it may. Or it may redeem you with a time lag or whatever. The fact does remain that they tried to create a process because there was interest in that. We haven't even tried thinking about creating a process because on the one hand, we like to believe the good. On the other hand, we don't want to follow the good. So what Chief Justice has said, in terms of symptoms, we are very good at spotting the symptoms. They're more visible. Does a cure? We've consistently failed. So how do you find someone who is a doctor of the system who can actually cure it? We don't have any. Our best wisdom was in our constitution. And we have tried to basically defile that by so many changes. It has to be a living document in any case, because the constitution can't be cast in stone. We can't remain frozen in time of 1950. So it has to be amendable. But how do you amend it? The character of the people who are going to amend it, the conversations they will have, the debate they will have, and that's where the current government has kind of let us down. It has taken away conversations from our politics, discussion from our politics. It has criminalized conversations. Anybody who opposes it is called anti-national. That is the beginning of the rot. That should not be allowed to happen. So corruption can only be taken out of the system when, number one, it's a live system, when conversations are not criminalized, and when every system is created at a 4-tier process: action, monitoring, evaluation, investigation. And then you go into a judicial process. Similarly, judicial process, like Prime Minister cannot meet Chief Justice, nobody can meet a justice. A justice is 24/7 on scrutiny under the camera. Cannot. And now if you start doing it, things will start changing. Use technology to create these 4-tier structures of functioning and then appeal and so on and so forth. Those are initial thoughts that I have based on how corruption has been addressed. It's never been eliminated. But how to minimize it, we can do that. With that, I take your leave until the next episode. Thank you.